Peace,
Blog
everyone.
Talk Radio.
Peace, everyone. Baba Kilindi here. Hope we are going out over the frequencies and airways so that we can have a nice call-in chat this evening about some of the things that are in the news and are, making an impact on our lives. We're going to talk about 5G. We have our co-host this evening, Rob Henson, who's going to be calling in to share with all of you his information. We're going to talk. We're going to move back and forth and get this thing going, get this thing started. It's a pleasure anytime I can get a chance to talk with you folks and share knowledge, information, and get a chance for us to be able to talk. So I hope things are working well. We do have difficulties from time to time. I don't know whether that's the artificial intelligence crapping around with us or it's just the program. We'll have to see how it goes this evening. I was thinking about some things. I was thinking about trash, actually. Let's say you have connected to the 5G, to the Internet of Things, the all-invasive, all-inclusive Internet that is being put out as we speak. Say you go to the Amazon Go store and you buy a water, a Fiji water. And with that Fiji water, you walk into the store, pick up the Fiji water, walk out, drink the water. Now that bottle is connected to you because it's a smart bottle. Now you have smart trash cans at your house. So if you take that plastic bottle and you throw it into the recycling bin, then you maintain your status as far as your goodness as a citizen. But if you take that plastic bottle and you put it in the paper trash receptacle, then that paper trash receptacle will send a message to the artificial intelligence that this person points should be taken from them, and they should be punished because at a particular time you're showing yourself as not a good citizen because you put the bottle in the wrong receptacle, because you're going to have smart trash cans also in the short term, the short run. So say you drop that bottle out the window, or say you give the bottle to somebody else and that person throws it on the sidewalk. That bottle will still talk to the sensors that are in the environment. Could be on a telephone pole or a light pole or something like that. And they will hook that bottle to you and demerit your points because your bottle is not where it's supposed to be in a proper receptacle. So that bottle will follow and is hooked to you and discharge from your particular holding of that particular code that the bottle is hooked to. Because you're going to be given a rating. And each little thing that you do that's so-called antisocial will take demerits from your particular status. If you're a 5 status, and 5 status is good, 5 to 10 is good, and you get demerits going up, and you get demotion of merits going down according to things you do, they will punish you according, then you may be able to only get, you may only be able to get a slower internet speed. You may not be able to, you may be put on a no-fly list. A lot of different things they can do that will demerit from your account. So, we have to be able to, understand some of the things that are going to be happening. I believe our co-host is in, Rob Henson. We're going to bring him in. Rob, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Kilindi. How are you tonight?
Pretty good, pretty good. I was just holding down the fort till we got you in here. How are things going?
So far, so good. I want to say hello to your listening audience. It's been a while since my last time on the show.
Yeah. Well, glad you could make it, and we've been going on other shows for the last few weeks, dealing with Black Panther, and its rise to fame and things like that. They, of course, didn't think that it would be as successful as it was. Are you hearing me good? I hear a little tearing in the background there.
I can hear you pretty good. I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, well, that's good, and hopefully it's going out like that to everybody else. But, we've been on the Black Panther trail for the last couple of weeks, and I wanted to kind of, even though we may touch and run past that this evening, I wanted to deal with, the Nazi super soldier program, Roswell, Bruce Lee, just kind of take it around the park here and, just let it all hang out and let people at some point ask some of the questions that they want to ask about some of the things that we talk about and that we do. So we can just kind of get started, you and I, going back and forth, and that's usually the best way we do it, So I'd like to start out with, say, the Iraq War and Gilgamesh.
Oh, okay. Well, just want to say thanks for having me on again. And, that ties into a lot of things. That I just want to say to your audience that a lot of these things that we discuss, and I know, and I've been knowing you for many, many years, and a lot of things that you have discussed at lectures that I've been privileged to be at, that you presided over, conferences that you've given, these types of things. A lot of this information, the purpose for it in the community in general, and I would say definitely in the Black community in specific, is to enlighten and educate and edify our people about this kind of false. I don't want to overuse the word matrix because people relate that to the movie, but it is a good term. That this kind of false reality that we live in. It's like you were talking about the computers and all that stuff, and how the internet and how everybody is now going out of their way, really, to be socialized into social media and interconnected with the internet. And that, you and I, of course, I don't want to give away our ages here, but you and I, of course, were born in that era and grew up in an era where there was no internet. There was no social media. There was no electronic web of interconnectedness and information. And so basically, right. So basically, we didn't grow up with all this. So we are coming from, and other people in our generations are coming from a unique perspective and seeing that how we saw the world change due to all of this false interconnectedness that has been done under the name of progress, but it really isn't. And I want to throw out there a thought, and I want to put this out there, that the idea of all of us being part of a web, both a biological, electromagnetic, social, cultural, genetic web, that idea is the original idea, and that's nature, and that actually comes from the Creator. So that interconnectedness already existed on a natural level, and it was our failure to, and more of the failure on some people in some cultures and some eras than others, but still, it's universal, our failure as a race of people on the planet to actualize, to self-actualize in terms of our consciousness and our knowing how interconnected we are, not only with each other, but with the planet itself, the animals, the plants, the soil, everything is connected. And everything has a result or a consequence, everything that you do, because the planet and the ecosystem and nature and we being part of all that is set up to work that way. So that was the true lesson, really, that the creator, the real creator, not these scientists and these people that think that they are godlike because they know a little bit of something, but the real creator that put everything on this planet, put the planets in orbit, put us on the planet, all of these things. This is what the lesson was supposed to be. And the indigenous cultures of the planet were in a position to learn that lesson, maybe at a slower pace, but they were still learning it because they did not have the kind of technology that Western culture eventually came up and created. And Western culture, this thing that we're talking about now that you just mentioned, this internet and all of this false interconnectedness, where they don't want to connect everybody through the internet and through electronic media and through social media and all these things for any benevolent purpose of universal oneness. On the surface, it looks like it's being done as part of progress. It's being done to make things easier. You can get on the internet now, and instead of you having to drive out of your house and go shopping, they have services that you can download on your phone, that you can get on your phone, and you can call, and Amazon.com will deliver your groceries to your house. There's a thing I just found out about that's a service that they have here. I know they have it in Philly. I don't know if it's national or not. But you can download the app off the internet on your phone for free. And if you wake up in the middle of the night and you want a snack, you don't have to even get in your car and go to the local shopping mall or the local late-night store or eatery or whatever. You call these people up and they will deliver snacks like a bottle of beer and a bag of potato chips or a personal pan pizza or a quart of ice cream or whatever. They will deliver it to your house. So a lot of this stuff people are looking at and they're going, well, it's good that we have the internet. It's good that we have social media. It's good that everything is interconnected. It makes everything so convenient. But the point is, this is just the icing on the donut. This is just the surface. What people have to wake up to is that what's really behind this and where this is going to go is that there is a movement going on behind the scenes. And it is interconnected from the people that are in the government, the people that are in politics, the people that are in industry, the people that are creating this technology and really created it a long, long time ago. And I'm going to go into that and how they unfurled it into bit by bit, piece by piece. So that basically what we're getting is a trickle-down technology that we think we're getting the most advanced communications, the most advanced medical treatment, the most advanced cell phones and computers and all of these things. And really what we're getting is hand-me-down stuff, that they've had stuff that is way more advanced than anything that we have access to, and they had it maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they're just trickling it down to us because they want us to live in a certain type of controlled reality. And I want people to be mindful of that term, controlled reality. Because controlled reality is a big, big part of what's going on with us in the world today. Controlled reality. It's a big, big part of it. And if you want to control people, you have to control the reality they live in. Then, if you can, persuade them kind of on a subconscious level, to become integrated into that control reality to the most highest degree possible, you will eventually establish a pattern of control, and they've done it. And they're trying to do even more of it. So that's the purpose of why we have these conversations, is to enlighten people and then kind of start giving them a heads up on what to watch out for, what to look out for, and maybe kind of what to do about it. Because there are things that you can do, and just people don't take it seriously enough. We do not have the kind of movements that we had in the 60s, and even, I would say some of them survived into the early 70s maybe, where we had people out there who were leaders in the community. We had people like Malcolm X. We had people like Martin Luther King. We had people like, the Black Panther Party, UEP Newton, all of these people. And some of them are famous and some of them are not so famous. But we had leaders in the community, and not just in our community. You had them even in the white community. You had people who were willing to step up to the plate and say, I disagree with what's going on. I disagree with what the government is doing or what the intelligence agencies are doing or what the military is doing or whatever. And you could get a movement to let them know that the people, that this government is supposed to represent the people now, not the other way around. We're supposed to be telling them what to do, not them controlling us and telling us what to do. And, it was pretty much, you had some kind of foundation to fight back with. I want people to look around and notice that this is almost kind of evaporated. You have these little movements and these little responses to certain things happening, like the so-called movement where you've got all the different women up in arms about the sexual harassment, the thing that supposedly had been suppressed for many, many years. And now you got this whole Me Too movement where just everybody who's anybody that's male, that's even been hinted at having done something inappropriate with a woman, is being brought to bear. You have the Black Lives Matter movement where you have all these people talking about police brutality and being persecuted by various police departments in various cities and being color profiled and all that stuff. And we know that these things, of course, have been going on for quite some time. It's just that now everybody got a cell phone and everybody can take a picture of everything. So everything's on camera. So that's so. In some senses, this Orwellian, Huxleyan, interconnected proto-fascistic world or techno-fascistic world that we are entering into, and that we have already indeed entered into, it has some aspects that it even bites the people who created it back. It bites them in the buns, so to speak, because if everything's on camera and everything can be instantly downloaded on Twitter, then even acts of fascism can be done also. But you also notice that even when these police officers and these people get caught doing these things, not a lot of them get persecuted, and not a lot of them get sentenced, and not a lot of them get the punishments that they should get for flagrantly abusing their power. So the system will still do what it wants to do, and that's something we need to think about. But the point that I'm trying to make is we've got these movements, but none of these movements are connected. In the 60s, there was an entity, a political, cultural entity, and it was economic also, because people have money, and they can vote with their money in a whole lot of different ways to let the government and the powers that be behind the government know what we find acceptable and what we do not find acceptable. And people should take some time to study that movement in the 60s, what was called the counterculture movement. And it was an across-the-board grassroots movement. It did not start off being integrated, just like we got these various little movements now. You had a lot of movements then. You had the anti-war movement was one of the biggest ones, and the civil rights movement. Those two were probably the two biggest movements of the 60s counterculture period. And then you had a lot of other little movements involved. You had the environmentalist movements. You had the women's rights movement. You had a lot of these other movements also. But at some point in that period, these people started to realize that separate, we have very little power separated. See, that's the flip side of the whole a Gestalt integrationist type theory. And I'm using a German word here, Gestalt, which hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly because I'm not German. But it is a theory that states that that an organism or an organization, or even like a biological entity, could be a thing that is a amalgamation of many different separate parts, that individually the parts have function and they have some power to act or to imprint themselves upon reality, but their individual power to affect things is minimal compared to their organized group function, in terms of that this thing is greater together than the sum of its parts. That if you add it up, it turns into something much bigger than its individual parts would indicate in terms of its power and its ability. There's a very interesting science fiction story that might illustrate it. There's an author named Theodore Sturgeon, and he was a fairly prolific science fiction writer. And in the 1950s, he wrote a science fiction novel called More Than Human. I believe that this is one of the things that the comic book creators at Marvel, and specifically Jack Kirby, who I talked about on an earlier show, he's the guy that all the Marvel comic book movies and things that you see today with the Avengers and Thor and the stuff that's coming up, the Black Panther that we just got that movie, and the Avengers Infinity War that we're about to get. This guy was the guy that was really behind all of it. They credit Stan Lee with it, but I really believe it was Jack Kirby, the guy who drew it and designed all of it. And basically, I believe that this book I mentioned, this science fiction book written by this other author, Theodore Sturgeon, and a lot of these people are being forgotten. Most of the younger people, the millennial generation that grew up with the internet and all these things, they don't really read books anymore like the people in our generation did, because they can access information over the internet so easy that they figure, why read a book? And they grew up with computers, they grew up with video games, they grew up with things that bring about information gratification and senses gratification so quickly that they're really not acclimated to sitting down and cracking open a book and reading it. They don't have the concentration for that. They've been bred to have a faster form of conscious focus and concentration, the kind of concentration that you need to be flitting all over the internet and having images projected at you and information pumped at you into thousands and thousands of gigabytes of information per second. So they don't really have the type of mindset to pick up a book. The problem with that is many of the things that I'm talking about that they cannot, most people that are going to listen to this have never heard of, is that they grew up in a generation where the internet filters information to you. When you punch in that search engine, it only spits at you, A, what you inquire about. It doesn't necessarily make any connections with things. And B, only to a very superficial sugar on the donut degree. And last but not least, many things are tampered with. Many of the sources of information, including Wikipedia and other things, they do give information that is sometimes shallow, sometimes very edited, and sometimes not even correct. And so when they do this Cliff Notes version of research and they think that they're gaining knowledge, if they haven't really done foundational research by reading hard copy books, many of which are out of print, and they would have to go digging for these books, because a lot of what the print medium and the print industry allows to be put into book form today that you will find if you walk into your local bookstore, and you will notice that the bookstore chains are dwindling. That's another thing that the Internet is doing. The Internet is making a lot of things go obsolete. Like it made the home movie industry with CDs and DVDs and these type of things. That kind of went all obsolete. Store outlets like Blockbuster Video and places like that went out of business because of the Internet. You can now download movies on the Internet. You can stream movies on the Internet. You can do these types of things. Or it's also affecting books the same way. People are not necessarily running to bookstores because I can download the file for that. Or I can have that whole book on a PDF file. You know, they can. And I know websites where I can pirate it for free. You know, so this is what they do. So that's making books go out. And the thing that you don't understand is anytime you do anything on the Internet, somebody can program that or tweak that in such a way that the information is not quite all there, not in the right sequence, not in the right context. You really do need to read books. You really need to study history, sociology, biology, physiology, chemistry, military history, political and economic history. You've got to be educated, because the more educated you are, the more aware you can become, and the more easily you can digest and assimilate this fast-acting information that you now have access to. You know, I know when I read something and I can distill, and so can you, Kilindi, and a lot of people from our generation that are scholars, they can distill the crap and the misinformation from the truth and the real information. I can read an article or a file that's compiling both disinformation and real information, and I can kind of pick out the gems from the crap, even when they're putting it in that form in order to mix you up. I can kind of avoid being mixed up because I read the book or studied the author or studied the guy who they are quoting or who they're getting the information from.
Yes, yes.
So coming back to what I was saying, this book about the Gestalt mechanism by Theodore Sturgeon is called More Than Human. It was written in the 50s, and it's a seminal work in the science fiction community, those of us who are science fiction fans from way back. It's considered one of the classics, and I believe that Jack Kirby, the guy who created a lot of the stuff at Marvel Comics, that he based the X-Men partially on this novel. I think that he read this novel, and that's where he got the idea from the X-Men from. If you read it, you'll understand why I'm saying that. So the Gestalt mechanism and the Gestalt theory of interconnectedness and all of us being parts, that together we create an organism that is far more powerful than what we are as individual entities. That's actually a cosmic idea. That's actually a celestial idea. That's actually a divine idea. And what this whole in artificial intelligence, internet, social media, electronic attempt to scientifically duplicate the biological, environmental, spiritual, and genetic miracle of interconnectedness that the Creator invented, that definitely has a purpose, has a place, and has a pathway of evolution that the Creator has mapped out for us. These people attempting to overshadow that with this technological parody of it is an attempt to create a parallel reality that they can control, where they no longer have to answer to the laws of God, who designed all of this. And I'm not coming from a religious point of view. I'm coming from a straight spiritual point of view. That is the fight that is going on. That is what we are dealing with. They're not creating transhumanism or artificial intelligence or any of these things to benefit anybody. They're doing this so that they can incorporate anyone who partakes of that into a false reality, a matrix, an artificial reality where they will control you and they will feed off of you, because these people are also parasitic. They want you to be part of this because without you they can't really do it. It all collapses. Because they know how powerful we all are, because the Creator made us powerful. Not them. The Creator has already put things in here that I don't need somebody to add nanotechnology or bionics or gene therapy or genetic engineering, because what's already in here and the system that was designed for what's already in here to be unlocked, that is what the Creator did, and we need to explore the natural method, the naturopathic, organic method of becoming all that we were to be.
Rob, yeah, well, that's what I've always been saying as far as the entheogens and the organic singularity. See, when Geordie Rose, when they made the D-Wave quantum computer, he said standing next to the computer is like standing at the altar of an alien god. And Hugo de Garis says that we are God building. In other words, they are looking at this artificial intelligence, which is the most dangerous thing that we have in existence as far as our fight. I mean, I know that we look at atomic war and, famine and white supremacy and all the different things, but the most crucial area of research in dealing with what we're actually in opposition to is this artificial intelligence, of which is, although it's at a very infant stage right now, this is the ongoing fight that's been going on for eons. Prior to the formation of this universe, this thing has been going on with this artificial intelligence between and that's the whole thing of the organic singularity that was already in place to be able to combat this with the mushrooms and the different compounds that we utilize to tap into that genetic code that's already there, that's already ready to open up that non-coding DNA into the superhuman to be able to combat the artificial intelligence, which is now at this point raising its head, in an exponential fashion to try to get ahead of the organic singularity as in opposition to that technological singularity that's going on.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with what you're saying, and I don't want people to get me wrong in that I'm against technology. I have I like air conditioners and fans, and I think computers are actually pretty snazzy to have, and and we wouldn't even be having this conversation whether we're having it right now if it wasn't for telecommunication technology and all that. So technology in service to mankind has a modality or a tool for various things is good, as long as we're in control of it. But when you start talking about artificial intelligence and artificial singularities and these type of things, you're now talking about it being in control and us being subordinated and incorporated into something that we ourselves are allowing ourselves to be part of the creation of, whether we're directly or indirectly involved on one level or another, or we're just being co-opted into something. And that's what I'm talking about. So, not forgetting your earlier request about Gilgamesh, how that ties into that. That's just the latest in a long line of things for your listening audience that may or may not know who Gilgamesh is. Gilgamesh was a semi-historical / semi-mythological figure, and I say that to mean that at certain intervals in Western history, those who even knew anything about Gilgamesh, who are people who are archaeologists and people who dug up, relics from ancient cultures, specifically cultures in what we now call the Persian Gulf area or the Middle East, or however they want to call it geographically. Basically, we're going back to the Mesopotamian culture and the Mesopotamian civilization and the mythologies and some of the history that came out. And the curious thing that people who will get into this will notice is that the further back you go, the line between what is mythology, stories that have been handed down based on legends that later become codified as myths, and then still later they become religion. The line between these ancient legends and actual history starts to blur and fuse, and many of the things that we would on the surface and just picking up a book on mythology and reading it and say, well, these are just all based on legends and none of these people existed and none of this happened. Actually, that line begins to blur. As you dig into it, you start to find out that no, a lot of this is actually based on reality. These people did exist. They had bloodlines. They had sometimes physical remains that have been preserved, and there were certain entities, certain clandestine organizations and secret societies that have been infiltrated into and imprinted into our government, our military, our political and economic industrial military complex, as I'm quoting President Eisenhower, who coined that phrase. There is a shadow government. There is a shadow reality. There's a shadow hierarchy of leadership in our government, in our society. An evolution of something that's been around for centuries, even before the United States even existed, because it existed in Europe, it existed in ancient Africa, it existed in Mesopotamia. So it's kind of like been evolving and passing down through various societies and cultures, governments and empires, and you can kind of trace it all the way back to Mesopotamia. And there's two periods of Mesopotamia. There's the post-flood and pre-flood Mesopotamia. So when we start talking about Gilgamesh, King Gilgamesh, he was a king that basically was the king of a city, a walled city called Erech. Erech is, from that root word, is where they derive the word Iraq, which we let now, that's a country that over there in the Persian Gulf that we call Iraq, and it covers an entire geographical area. Well, the name for that whole area comes from this city, this Mesopotamian mythological city called Erech. And Erech was the city that Gilgamesh was the king of. And Gilgamesh is also mentioned, or his story is talked about in something called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Again, I would encourage your listeners out there in Radio Land, Blog Talk Land, to, if they don't already know who Gilgamesh is and they're not familiar with it, to look it up. You go to Wikipedia and look up, who was Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh was the subject of what is considered to be the oldest epic heroic poem ever to be dug up or found anywhere. Okay, so he is a mythological hero, or there is a story about him that falls into the category of a mythological epic that's along the same lines as the Odyssey, the Iliad, any of the stories in Greek mythology about Hercules or Heracles, any of the mythological heroes that have since come down, passed down to us, that you can walk into any bookstore and say, I want to go to your section on mythology, and you'll see all these different books of these different cultures about these demigods and basically what we today call superheroes. Because when we're in the movies watching the Avengers or the Justice League or whatever, that is exactly what we are watching. We are watching modernized versions of ancient mythology, where you have people who are in human form, but they have godlike powers. Like Wonder Woman has godlike powers. Superman has godlike powers. And Thor, he's actually supposed to be a god of thunder and all of these things. And in the movie we just saw, the Black Panther was an African king, but he's got superhuman powers because he's connected to a panther god called Bast, which is actually an Egyptian cat god. But, so these things are kind of just different day, same thing, different day. So when you start talking about Gilgamesh is kind of the granddaddy of all of that mythological the demigod superhero stuff. And his story is the first story of its kind. And in that story, he kind of does everything that you would pay your $10 or $11 today to go to a movie and see a superhero movie. The archetypes and the tropes for that type of story, everything is there in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And this is something that was hundreds of thousands of years ago. So there's nothing new under the sun. There's a statement in the Bible, I believe it's in Ecclesiastes, and it's basically that there's nothing new under the sun. Everything which has already been, and everything which has been is what will be. So basically, this is what we have. So Gilgamesh was pretty much, he was a mythological demigod, and his story even accounts that he was 2/3 God and 1/3 human. And his God bloodlines, or his divine genes, came through his mother's bloodline. So these things are very, very meticulous in the story, to the point where you start looking at these stories and you go, well, if they're mythology, why would the writers of these poems, knowing that this is purely for entertainment purposes, or this is just a legend and was not to be taken seriously, why would they go into such meticulous detail to tell you who these people's bloodlines was and their ancestors and how they came to be? Why would they go into that in the story? Or why would they go into meticulous detail about where this guy is buried at and all of these things, if this is just like, a mythological story? Because when you read fictional stories today, they don't go out of their way to give fictional characters that kind of bio. Almost like it's something you should study or look up. And yet, in the case of Gilgamesh, when they did archaeological digs, in the specific archaeological dig that I'm going to talk about, that they did at the University of Penn, sponsored back in the 1800s. There's a guy named John Peters Putnam, who was a American professor of Assyriology. He was he was a professor at the University of Penn. He was connected to the Cultural Archaeological Museum that we still have here in Philadelphia today. So it's still connected to the University of Penn. And basically, he was sent out to the area of Iraq to search for a lost city that they believe might have been part of this ancient Mesopotamian culture called the Sumerian culture. And he had along with him a German scientist who was also a professor at the University of Penn at that time, named Hermann Hilprecht. And the two of them went into this area, and this is again in the 1800s, so you're talking about, this is in the decade preceding the outbreak of World War I. World War I has not yet happened, so the Ottoman Empire is still in control of that area. And anybody that doesn't know what the Ottoman Empire is, I encourage them to also look that up. Because you cannot understand the world that we live in today if you do not understand how the things that we are dealing with today came into being. What is their origin? What is their pedigree? What is their pathway of evolution? See, the same way that you can have a person, anybody out there in our radio audience has a birthday. That's your beginning. And so whoever you are now and however far you come, you always have to keep sight of where you came from and where you started. And there's a saying that never forget where you came from, okay? Because in doing so, you might lose track of where you're trying to go. So you want to know how anything got like it is. You can't just look at it in the present tense and say this is the way things are, and I can fully understand it just by looking at the way it is now. You have to understand how it got that way, and for that purpose, you've got to do some research into its past, or the events that preceded it, the events that set it up. And we're not only talking about people, we're talking about organizations, governments, societies, cultures. How did they get to the point that they are now? How do we get in this mess that we're in now? It's easy to turn on the news and look at it, look at the situation and blame everything on Donald Trump. Not that he's not, doing a good job of, messing up in plain sight. But at the end of the day, to understand the factors, the social, economic, cultural factors, the scientific factors that make the world what it is, and many of the dissatisfaction, much of the dissatisfaction with the world the way it is, how did it get this way? So that's why I'm on a blog talk show tonight talking about a mythological yet real character, because I'm going to go into that he actually turned out to be real. And what does that have to do with the price of a beer and pretzels as we speak? What's that got to do with the price of groceries? People are like, you talking about this mythological Gilgamesh guy. What's that got to do with anything? Well, it's just an example of just where things are at and where they're going and how they're tied into the ancient past, and yet still affecting us today. So this Gilgamesh, this king of the walled city of Erech, which Iraq derives its name from, he was 2/3 God and 1/3 man. So he was the first character in human history who has a story that we can dig up, who would be in the category of a demigod. Demigod meaning that you're not a complete God because you're part human, but you have ancestry that you can trace back to actual God. Now, when I talk about gods, again, don't get me wrong. I want people to be real clear on where I sit spiritually. I believe there's only one God. There's only one source that all of creation came from, and there's a pattern that runs through all creation, a type of order that if you study nature, if you even study science, you will see the imprint of an intelligent design running through everything. This is not random. I don't care what the chaos theorists and these types of people put forth, that this is all random and there was just an explosion, a random explosion, and then bang, everything came into existence, and it just so happens to luck out that it has some order to it. I don't subscribe to the H.P. Lovecraft theory of reality. And anybody that, if that name is not familiar to you, that's something else you can look up. H.P. Lovecraft was a man named Howard Phillips Lovecraft. and he wrote in the I guess you can go all the way back to the 1920s, maybe. You know, he wrote a series of science fiction horror books based on a theory of that reality is actually chaotic, and that we are surrounded by chaos, and that there are beings that embody this chaos, that these monstrous beings embody this chaos. And he wrote a series of novels based on that. And he was very popular, and there's been a resurgence of him today where you can go in the bookstores and find a lot of stuff, whole sections of his work. Many of the horror and science fiction writers, people like Stephen King, cite him as kind of their literary antecedent, that he actually did this. It was the father of the genre, and he kind of did it better than anybody else. So Howard Philip Lovecraft, look him up. But basically, yeah, the ideology that the universe is random and chaotic, I don't buy that. I think it is orderly, and I think that there is a hand of order and method that goes through the macro and the microverse. So there is a God. I'm just going to cut it short by saying there is a supreme intelligence. That supreme intelligence is aware, cognizant of us. We come from it, and it has a plan. It has a direction. It has a game plan for all this being here and where all this is supposed to go and how it's supposed to function. So when I talk about the ancient mythological stories, those gods, I don't believe they're truly gods, but I believe that they were beings on a higher echelon of evolution, and so the human beings at that time looked at them as gods. And the specific group of beings that we're talking about that Gilgamesh drew his parentage or lineage from was a group of gods called the Anunnaki. And these Anunnaki gods were the source of his superhuman genetic heritage. And he is described in these stories as being a giant of a human being. That he is this tall, massively muscled, superhumanly strong individual. He's not a normal person, okay? He's like 9 feet tall or more, maybe between 9 and 10 feet tall. He's got superhuman strength, and he's an incredible hand-to-hand combatant. And he is the king of this city, not only by his divine lineage, but also by force of arms. Nobody can beat him. Nobody in single combat can overcome him. And all of the young boys in the culture and the young men aspire to be like him. And he is very warlike, it is mentioned in the story. And he feels that all the females in the culture, whether they're married or not, are his private domain sexually. And he one of the things he does in the story is he puts out an edict that he has the right to sleep with any man's wife on the night of their wedding before the husband does, because he is the king. And that causes no doubt trouble. So,
prima nocta.
Right, exactly. So what happened is, in the story, is that the people of the city of Erech wail and bemoan Gilgamesh's leadership, that he is very abusive, that he is running roughshod, and that nobody can stand against him. So they pray to the gods, the Anunnaki, to make another super being that can come along and put Gilgamesh in his place, that can give him a sense of humility. And so what happens is the gods respond. And in the story, they create a shadow, or what you would call mirror opposite of Gilgamesh, in that they create a being. And obviously this creature has been created through the same genetic engineering process that they used to create another group of people to whom we may or may not be partially related to. I don't believe we are. I believe we come from another line altogether. But there was a line in the world at that time that came from this line. And if you read the Enuna Elish, which is the Mesopotamian creation epic, you will get the 411 on that story. In terms of how the Anunnaki came to Earth to mine minerals, gold being one of them, and that they needed a workforce. They had a labor rebellion. The people that they brought down here to do all this digging and all this labor rebelled. And so they needed to create a workforce to replace them. And the story goes that two of the scientists, Enki and his assistant Ninhursag, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, that they proceeded to take a type of Pliocene ape man, some species of subhuman that we would call a prehuman, and they accelerated his genetic evolution by adding their own genes to it, the mix, and they were able to create this intelligent creature to use as a workforce. And eventually those beings evolved into very human-like, sentient race of beings that they became a threat to these Anunnaki, and the Anunnaki decided to annihilate them by causing a massive flood using some type of scalar weapon that could control the weather and the environment, which is no different than what they have today. They have such a weapon called HARP, or it may be in a more advanced state as now, and they can control the weather with it, and you can also look that up. So basically, these technologies reappear and kind of they phase out of consciousness and then come back, and they kind of reincarnate. And the reason why they come in and out is because the people with the knowledge to create them create civilizations. These civilizations eventually fall or are destroyed by their own excesses, and then the people that created those civilizations reincarnate. And then when they reincarnate, they start creating the technology, the political, the cultural, all the same systems that they created in previous eras. So we have human history divided into these different eras. And some of these mythological stories parallel that, and they're even though they sometimes seem unconnected with each other, or the continuity seems problematic. What you start to look at when you pull back, see the big picture is, it's not that the continuity is problematic. What you're seeing is a recurrence of the same type of thing over and over again, as civilizations develop, rise, fall, and then are reincarnated because the people that created them are reincarnating constantly throughout the millennia. There are people here right now that have been here thousands and thousands of years ago in another form, and some of them have a technology or a methodology by which they can remember their past lives, and most of us simply cannot. We don't remember what we ate for breakfast 5 years ago. But some of these people remember who they were 5,000 years ago, and they can continue on with whatever plans that they and their bloodlines, the people that they were doing these things with, they can, when they all get reincarnated, they can then continue where they left off. And this is why they're very hard to beat, very hard to outsmart, outthink. It can be done, but you have to understand the nature of what you're dealing with. So Gilgamesh was apparently one of these types of people. He was descended from this group of people who were probably just extraterrestrials called the Anunnaki. And he had their genes, and thus he was considered to be a superhuman. And basically, they asked the gods, the Anunnaki, to make another being that could humble him and kind of bring him down to earth and put him in his place. And since no normal human being could do it, these Anunnaki gods created, using a process of genetic engineering or transhumanistic genetic manipulation, and they created a mirror opposite. They created a being who was 2/3 animal and 1/3 human. So it's ironic that this opposite, or this mirror opposite to Gilgamesh, turned out to be this animal man named Enkidu. And this animal man was also a superhuman or a super animal man. So if you really look into the story and you read the description of him, he is kind of the primogenitor or what you would call the archetype, the prime archetype of what we today would call Bigfoot, the abominable snowman, any of those kind of giant humanoid kind of missing link animal feral men. If you look in comic books, for those people who like comic books and go to see all these movies, the X-Men character Wolverine, this is his mythological literary antecedent. The other X-Men called the Beast. He's the Sasquatch. All of these animal beast type feral men that you see in comic books and you see them in science fiction and all these things, and you also have conspiracy theories that there are these type of feral men, giant feral men running around. Actually, this guy Enkidu is the first time in human literary tradition that such a creature shows up. So Enkidu was kind of the pre-form of all these things, and he shows up, and he's out in the wilderness, naturally, and he's running with the animals, and the shepherds lay traps for the animals because they want the predatory animals, wolves and things like that, to not be able to get to their flocks. And this shepherd boy tells his father that, Father, there's a wild man running around, this enormous wild man running around with the animals, and he's destroying my traps. I'm finding my traps wrecked because this creature is doing it, and I'm very afraid. I've seen him, and he's not anything a human being could stand up to. What do I do about this? So the father tells the boy, well, the wisest man in existence right now that we have access to is the king, Gilgamesh. So go into the city and get an audience with the king, and the king will tell you how to deal with this wild man. So the boy does that. He goes into the city. And again, I encourage people to read this story, okay? Because, again, and if you get a good translation of it, I'm not making any of this up. This thing reads like a science fiction novel / comic book. Again, anything that you would go to the theater to see today, this has all of the elements in it. I mean, not too long ago, I went to the movies to see that movie, the big Marvel movie that came out before the Black Panther, the Thor Ragnarok movie, which was the big, the big thing when that was released by Marvel and Studios. And almost every element in that movie, you can find it in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The big fight between Thor and the Incredible Hulk that goes on in the gladiator arena. Well, Gilgamesh and Enkidu get into this supernatural, battle royal in this story. And just like Thor and the Hulk did in the Ragnarok movie, that they get into the fight, but later on they team up and become friends. The demigod and the mutated superhuman. Well, that's the same thing that happens in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And this story was written thousands and thousands of years ago. So the people think that, they're making these movies and you're getting these images for no reason. They're trying to tell you something. Hollywood is nothing accidental, and even though, yes, they're putting out things for entertainment, there is a method behind their madness. Okay, so I'm just putting that out there. People that are in control of all this, these images and these things come on the screen for a reason. So to bring it full circle, they eventually Gilgamesh and this Enkidu individual do finally meet. I'm not going to go into all the details of the story of how that happens, But the boy goes into the city. He confronts Gilgamesh with the knowledge that this wild man is. And Gilgamesh does tell the boy, well, look, this is a plan. Go and get a woman out of the temple. Because in Erech, at that time, they had these temples dedicated to the goddess Ishtar. And the goddess Ishtar will play an important part in the Gilgamesh story. If you read it, you'll see what an important part she plays. And basically, Ishtar is considered to be the goddess of love in this story. And if you look in ancient mythology, who Ishtar was, because, you know, if you go into the Egyptian mythology, the Egyptian goddess Ma'at, not Ma'at, but Osset, can be, or Isis, as the Greeks called her. It's, you know, you can see the archetype running throughout mythology with this goddess energy that she represents. So basically they had these temples in ancient Sumeria that were dedicated to the goddess Isis and the principle of love and fertility. And men could go into these temples if the man wasn't married or he lost his wife or for some reason really didn't have a mate and he was just lacking love in his life. And these handmaidens of the temple were dedicated to sexually pleasing anybody who came into the temple looking for some love and affection. But it wasn't considered to be prostitution. It was state-sponsored religious prostitution, actually, if you want the terminology for it. But it was considered to be sacred, that these handmaidens were considered to be the living embodiments of Ishtar. So basically, and the person would make a donation to the temple, and basically one of the handmaidens would go off with him, and it would be what we would call the modern, an ancient version of what we call sex therapy. Sex therapy. That's what they were doing. Okay, it wasn't just straight up prostitution. It was, they might just talk to the guy. He might just want company, or he might just want to be in the presence of a female, or whatever, or it might be sexual. I mean, it had a whole lot of connotations to it. But they were trained in the art of sexual pleasure. And Gilgamesh tells the boy, the shepherd boy, this wild man is wrecking your traps. Take a woman from the temple, and he gets this woman, I think her name is Shaman, and he takes her out into the wilderness, and Gilgamesh says, when this wild man gets, tell her to lie down naked, bare naked. And when this wild man gets her scent, he will come to her and copulate with her because he won't be able to resist her sexual erotic allure. And when he does this, none of the animals will want anything to do with him anymore, and his problem, your problem, will be solved. And so that's exactly what happens. The boy brings the temple sex worker back with him, gives her the instructions that the king gave him. She lays herself out naked, and the wild man comes along to the watering hole with the rest of the animals. And he catches her scent because she's got all these temple perfumes and things on that he's never smelled before, the sweet smelling stuff, and also he catches her female scent. And he comes along, and she allures him, and they have sex for like 10 days and 10 nights. And after having continuous sex with this woman for like, you know, a week and a half or the better part of a week and a half, when he finally gets enough and he gets up to go back to the animals, they pick up her scent on him and they run away from him, just like Gilgamesh said. And so now he is without placement. He doesn't know what it, before he kind of ran with the animals and he protected them and he knew what his place was. Now he has become displaced. He has become tainted. So she takes him by the hand and takes him back to the shepherd and the shepherd boy and takes him to their house. And they pretty much civilize and tame him. They shave all the hair off his body so that you can see that underneath this he's a human being, but he's enormous. He's massively muscled. He's about 9 feet tall, just like Gilgamesh. He probably weighs the better part of half a ton. You know, all of this is described in this story. You have to really read this to really get that I'm not making any of this up. There's several translations of it, and the better translations go into detail. So basically, he learns to speak. They talk to him, they teach him language, they teach him how to eat bread and drink wine and use utensils, and he becomes humanized. And they start telling him about King Gilgamesh and what an absolute prick that pardon my French, that King Gilgamesh is. And so Enkidu says, well, this King Gilgamesh sounds like a real hard case. Tell you what, take me in the city. I want to meet this guy. I want to see what he's made out of. He can't be just going around running roughshod over people, sleeping with people's wives and all this. Who does this guy think he is? So they take him to the city, and it just so happens that when he gets into the city, guys him and dress him up and, they throw robes over his body so that he doesn't scare people too badly because of how big he is. And they take him into the city, and there's a wedding ceremony going on. And Gilgamesh has already put out the edict that this man who just got married, don't go into your wife's bedchamber because I'm coming and I'm going to do your wife first, and then you will have the privilege of sloppy seconds after me, after the king. And so Gilgamesh is heading to go into this house, into this woman's wedding chamber, bedchamber, that just got married. And he done punked her husband, and the husband is distraught, but this is the king, and he's also a 9-foot-tall giant muscle man, so there ain't nothing we can really do. He's going to come and rape my wife, and I'm just going to have to sit here and watch. Basically, he when he gets to the house, and he finds this other giant being, Enkidu, who's now got all the hair shaved off of him, so he's another giant muscle man like him, and he's barring the door. And he's saying, not tonight. You're not going in here and rape this man's wife, not tonight. And they get into this hellacious fight that almost tears the entire city apart. They're knocking down buildings. It looks just like when you look at one of these, movies, when you're looking at, the Hulk or Superman or whatever, and they're fighting something, this is just what it looks like. So if you think any of that stuff is new and they just came up with this in the comic books and the movies, think again. This is why you need to read books, and you need to read mythology, and you need to go back into ancient culture, because everything that we have today is a reincarnation or a rehashing of that. And the other thing that you have to understand is that these themes don't run through this stuff for no reason. If they were based on total fantasy, culture after culture would not create these same characters over and over again. And these same characters, like I said, Gilgamesh is the first. But if you read Greek mythology and you read about Hercules, he's the same thing. If you read Norse mythology and you read about the frost giants and Ymir and all of these things, it's the same thing. If you go into South American mythology and you look at those cultures in South and Central America and ancient Mexico, you see these same types of characters show up. If you go to ancient Africa, you see the same types of characters show up. So these things are showing up over and over and over again. Even if you come to the continent of North America and you look at Native American lore, ancient Native American lore, they also have legends of these same types of beings. And then if you look in the Bible and you look in the Old Testament of the Bible into the book of Genesis, and they talk about the coming of the Nephilim. It's the same thing. You read the book of Enoch, he's describing exactly the same thing. Okay, so these creatures, these superhuman, transhumanistic giants who have this double bloodline, there's something very real about it, and people need to look into that. So to bring it up to date to the 1800s with the archaeological expedition led by John Peters Putnam and his German associate Hermann Hilprecht, they dig up a city in which an ancient Mesopotamian city in which they find copies on cuneiform tablets of an older version of the story of Gilgamesh. Now, they had already dug up copies of the Gilgamesh story. When I say they, I mean archaeologists, various archaeologists during different periods of time doing these archaeological digs in ancient Mesopotamia, or we now would call, Iraq or the Persian Gulf area. They had been doing these digs for quite a while. The British, the French, the Americans, everybody was over there digging stuff up. And they had found out of the library of King Ashurbanipal, they had found a series of tablets talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh. So it wasn't anything new that they didn't know about. But what they found in this particular dig was these tablets had more information. They were an older version of the story with more details. And that obviously these tablets talked about not only the exact location of where the walled city of Erech was, but also the exact location of where the tomb of King Gilgamesh, his mortal remains after he died, were finally placed. And apparently what happens then becomes a little confused because the German Assyriologist Hilprecht, who was John Peters Putnam's partner, and part of this story, I believe, I can't prove it, but I believe is the foundation for the movie Indiana Jones. If you look at the movie Indiana Jones and you look at what's going on in that first Indiana Jones movie, a lot of what goes on in that movie where they're both racing, you've got this German or French-German archaeologist working with the Nazis to try to get to the Ark of the Covenant before Indiana Jones gets to it. If you look at the relationship between the two of them and you look at the relationship between Putnam and Hilprecht, I believe it's loosely based on what actually happened. So Hilprecht, who's the German Assyriologist, goes behind Putnam's back and he makes a deal with the Sultan of the Turkish Sultan, and he has a guy who presides over all of the archaeological digs because the Ottoman Empire is in control of that area at that time, and you can't take anything out of that area without first negotiating with them. And so Hilprecht goes behind Putnam's back and makes a deal with the Turkish Minister of Archaeological Antiquities. And what happens is a lot of the archaeological stuff that's supposed to come back to the University of Penn because they sponsored it winds up going through the Turkish minister, and some of it winds up in the Turkish Museum, but a lot of the choice pieces, and I believe these were the pieces dealing with the exact location of Gilgamesh, they wound up in Hermann Hilprecht's collection, private collection, and were sent back to Germany. And this state of affairs causes a legal conflict between Putnam and Hilprecht over exactly who has jurisdiction over these artifacts that they've dug up, and it goes into a whole legal battle that lasts for years. Meanwhile, Hilprecht eventually passes away, and World War I eventually breaks out. And then after World War I, you have that period of time in between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II, where the Nazis are rising to power in Germany. And Hilprecht's wife is obviously a sympathizer with the Nazis, or she is of the same type of philosophy that they're of, and she decides to donate his archaeological collection to the Nazis. And the Nazis at that point become aware that the possibility of finding King Gilgamesh from this information they get from the clay tablet or the fragment of the tablet they get out of Hilprecht's collection. So they become interested at that point. Anybody that knows anything about the Nazis during that time will understand that prior to the outbreak of World War II, prior even to the Nazis taking over Germany as the leading political party of Germany, which happened in 1933 when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, many of the high-ranking officers of the SS that would later become part of the SS, a lot of those people had occult backgrounds going back, years before they got into the position that they were in. And they had run with things like the Tueller Society, the Vril Society. So a lot of them were occultists. And when the Nazis finally did get into power, Rudolf Hess, who was the Reichsfuhrer, meaning he was like the second man underneath Hitler himself, he appropriated money to something called the Abendmaler Society. And they went all around the world digging up artifacts and looking for connections to the ancient gods and their ancient technology and all of these things. This is what the Nazis were doing. So when you look at the movie Indiana Jones, that's really what that's talking about, that period. And they really were going all around the world doing this stuff, digging up all of these things, thinking that there would be some hidden secrets to some type of super technology that they would then be able to weaponize and put them on top of the world. And to a large part, a lot of it turns out to actually be true. Don't take my word for it. There are a couple of different authors you can read who really specialize in this area. There's a guy named Tom Augustine. Look him up and look up his works. There's another guy named Joseph P. Farrell who's done extensive work on this. And these guys are scholars. These guys are not just some fly-by-night guys who are writing pseudo-historical fiction. They've done a lot of research, and I've done a lot of research myself. And I can attest to the fact that a lot of what is taught about the Germans during World War II and prior to that, and a lot of what was taught about the war and the outcome of the war and how things actually happened, a lot of it is misinformation that is carefully calculated to give people the totally wrong impression of what happened in 1945 at the defeat of Nazi Germany. There's a whole lot of things that people are not being told about the Germans and about what they were doing. So to bring it up to date, when the conflict between Saddam Hussein and the United States spilled over into all-out war, and our then President George W. Bush basically pseudo-connected the reason why we're going to invade is that Saddam Hussein is, in fact, harboring weapons of mass destruction that are dangerous that makes his regime a danger to the stabilization of the entire area. And this is why he has to be put down. That was all BS, to put it mildly. On a number of levels, even politically. And the climate in America at that time, which was post 9/11, is one of the things that allowed people to be lulled and sucked into this whole fiasco and allowed the American people to stand back and allow this invasion to occur that never needed to happen, because in people's minds and the way that George Bush and his administration played it in the media, there was some kind of connection between 9/11 and Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and that Al-Qaeda that whole terrorist cell that supposedly was responsible for the World Trade Center bombing, that somehow Saddam Hussein was connected with that. And I don't think that Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein has collaborators. That whole theory, I don't believe that the Bush administration ever, beyond a shadow of a doubt, accurately proved that there was some indeed connection between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein's regime. And that he was also harboring weapons of mass destruction also was never proved. In fact, the UN weapons inspector that went to Iraq to look for these chemical weapons and weapons of mass destruction that he supposedly had didn't find any. That's a matter of historical record. They didn't find any. So then what was the true reason behind George Bush's invasion of Iraq? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Yes, some people say, well, he wanted to finish what his father started with the first Persian Gulf War, because that happened under his father's administration. So he had an axe to grind on that level. The second thing was, well, the Bushes are oil people. They got their wealth in the oil business. And, there's oil over there. So that's another reason why we might have, our government might have wanted to put an army in that area to control those oil resources. Okay, and I agree with all that. But there could have been a third reason. And the third reason was they were looking for a weapon possibly of mass destruction. But the weapon that they were looking for didn't have anything to do with Saddam Hussein. The Baghdad Museum was raided sometime just prior to the invasion of Iraq, the American invasion of Iraq. You can look all this stuff up, or you can check the dates of when this happened. Sometime on a very short period right after the American invasion of Iraq, information concerning the exact location of the tomb of King Gilgamesh was reported to have been found, but not by the Americans, by the Germans. So if you follow the breadcrumbs of what I've been saying, and hopefully I'm not lulling anybody to sleep with all of this background information, but I had to set it up properly to really let people in on an understanding to get the proper sequencing of events. And again, this is why you have to know history. So we're talking about things that unfolded all the way back in ancient Mesopotamia, then later on things unfolding all the way back in the 1800s, now playing themselves out to conclusion around 2004. Okay? So they found the tomb of King Gilgamesh, and they dug him up. And you can go on the internet, and you can punch it in, and you can look at all the details. But it isn't the Americans that found him, it's the Germans. But sometime right before the invasion, the Baghdad Museum was raided, and that is a matter of public records. You can look that up. And, it was made to look like that whoever did it possibly were American troops. But anybody can wear an American uniform. See, the fact is that the German Secret Service was in Iraq around the time that all of the non-Iraqi citizens that were over there, people attached to the various embassies, were given a notification by the United States State Department that the imminent invasion of Iraq by United States military forces was about to jump off, and that they should clear out as quickly as possible if they didn't want to be caught in a militarized zone. And I think that the German Bundesstaaten, the German Secret Service or the German intelligence, who happened to be there in Iraq, said this is our opportunity to get the other half of that tablet that the Germans have had since the Nazi regime. Because Hilprecht's wife, the Assyriologist that dug up that stuff, had a fragment, but he didn't have the other half of the fragment. He had a partial fragment. The other half just so happened to have wound up in the Baghdad Museum. It was probably part of the collection that went to the Sultan during the original dig when he made the dirty deal behind his partner's back. And he thought he got the goods, but he only got half of them, and the rest of it wound up in the Turkish museum. When the Ottoman Empire fell, it changed hands, and eventually it winds up, in the Baghdad Museum. They knew it. They figured it might be there, and if they could get that piece and put it with their piece, it would then give them the whole picture, the whole map of what they needed to know, and I think that they got it. And that's just my theory on it, and that's my theory on how it happened. But
Rob,
this is the question. Yeah.
We want to take a few questions. This is there's a method to our madness in this, and giving people the background. So those who stick and those who come on the shows and listen to what we're talking about, it's going to pay off in the long run. But you have to do your research in the meantime on some of the things that we're talking about, because there's a method to what we're trying to put forth, but it takes background information, and most people don't have the background information to be able to fully understand what we're trying to convey. So we're going to do several other shows to complete the full picture of how we put this thing together, so that our folks will know and have a good background in the history that brings it all up to today, because there's a whole Nazi part of this. We want to go into Operation Paperclip. We want to go into MK Ultra. We're going to go into the space program and the shadow space program. We're going to go into the fake moon shots and the moon shots and all of these different things that are part of the basis of how the shadow government has put this thing together over the last 10,000 years, because it's the same folks reincarnating, putting all this together. The reason why Gilgamesh is important, the reason why these mummies are important and all these other things, is because they still carry the DNA of the 2/3 God, 1/3 human. And to merge through cross, through cross gene transfer, through cloning and things like that, to bring back the race of these Anunnaki and these God bloodlines into a fuller, way of being expressed, because these folks who've been reincarnating, they're part of those bloodlines, but they need an infusion. So they're looking for the bodies that were preserved genetically to be able to reposition themselves in the ancient bloodline. So this is part of what we're doing, but we need to give folks the background into it. We're going to go into all the different things. So, Rob, what I wanted to do real quick is bring a couple of people in to see if they want to ask you a question or something like that, and because we only have about 25 minutes left. So let's see what we can do here as far as bringing somebody in. 419 area code. Would you like to make a question, or we don't have time for real long comments, but if you have a question, 419, please come in and at least say greeting.
Greetings, Baba Kilindi, Mr. Henson. This is Heson. I'm calling from Toledo, Ohio.
Great
show this evening. I was just real quick question. There was a lot of history that you gave, but I was trying to make sense of it within the context of the AI and the simulations that the AI is running, and trying to figure out is this reincarnation, this search to bring different ancestors back through bloodlines, is that all taking place within the simulation that the AI is running, or is this a separate thing? Just a little clarity on that.
Well, yeah, you've got two separate things going on, and they're connected in this sense. At some point back in the dim dark past, people from other, I would say, civilizations, non-terrestrial civilizations, came here physically. Some of them incarnated here spiritually. So there's two different ways we're talking about it happening. But it all has to do with bloodlines. Apparently, some of these cultures had already decided to rebel against the status quo of the way things work in this universe. And they already had aligned themselves with this artificial intelligence, this rogue intelligence, this whatever you want to call it. I call it a Luciferian complex, okay? And I have my reasons for calling it that. But basically, you have civilizations that align themselves with this. And they went to war with other civilizations that were trying to suppress this or make this not spread or not happen. And you had a cosmic or an intergalactic war, okay? And it happened in systems like the Pleiades, the Orion system, the Sirius system. And so a lot of these extraterrestrial races that came to Earth, when Earth was in its early developing stages, and impacted human civilization, a lot of this is what brought these people here, because it was the fallout of that intergalactic war. That's part of the reason why you have the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, because there was a civilization or a planet there that no longer exists. It was destroyed, and this is where George Lucas gets his whole thing in Star Wars about the Death Star and all of that, and this thing that can blow up whole planets and all of this stuff. All of these things in Hollywood, this science fiction stuff, is drawing itself from these secret archives that a lot of the secret societies, like the Freemasons and whatnot, certain branches of them, they have these access to this type of prehistory, cosmic prehistory. So the bloodlines that came to Earth that were interested in creating this artificial singularity and had the technology to give it form and content and direction, those people lived and incarnated within the human bloodline at various periods in human history, and they always rise to the top of the ladder and the top of the society, and they have access to a lot of technology that is concurrent with the levels of technology of those societies, because they are able to remember extraterrestrial, highly advanced technologies that they carry with them. But when they die physically, they reincarnate and they have these memories intact and they can recreate this technology. So that's how they are connected with the artificial intelligence. But they're also genetically trying to find ways to completely reconstitute their genetic bloodlines, which are non-terrestrial.
Very good.
Some of these mutants and these giants, these monsters got here. Okay. They're almost like invasive. If you look at the planet as a living organism, and us has the natural extensions of the living organisms, meaning we're the software that is naturally supposed to be occurring with the hardware of this planet, they would be like virus or invasive programs, both genetically and as far as the AI is concerned. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we're gonna we don't have a little time, so we're gonna move on to the next caller. Thank you very much, caller, for your question. I hope that answered it. We're moving to the 313. Do you have any questions? 313 going once, twice, and thrice. Okay, we're going to move on to the 916 area code. 916, do you have a question? Okay, you got something else going on in the background. We're going to move on. 248. 248, do you have a question? 248, do you have a question or for Mr. Henson?
No questions at all. Just enjoy listening. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, area code 734. Do you have a question for Rob or myself? 734. You have a question? Okay, we're going to keep it moving. Area code 702. 702, do you have a question so we can keep it moving?
No question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for listening. Area code 214, do you have a question? Area code 214, do you have any questions? Okay. All right, let's move on to the next. Area code 469. 469, do you have a question?
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
No, I'm late coming in, but I'm so happy that I was able to tune in. I don't have any questions at this time. Thanks.
Okay. Peace. Area code 586. Do you have a question? Area code 586.
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. We're gonna keep it rolling. As I said before, there's a method to the madness, but we have to break down the background information. I wanted to let everybody know that we do have a couple of major things coming up this year. The Food of the Gods tour in Mexico coming up in June, which is where we're going to the mountains outside of Oaxaca to smoke the toad and eat the food of the gods and commune with the Olmecs, Aztecs, Mayan, and others of that area from ancient times coming up. So you can participate in that. You go to the website, DetroitPsychedelics.com. That's psychedelics. Detroit Psychedelics with an S.com. Also, we have the Detroit Psychedelic Conference coming up in August, April 10th, 11th, and 12th in the city of Detroit, and we'll be bringing in speakers from all over the world to participate and give out entheogenic, hallucinogenic, psychedelic information, and we're going to have a real informative time. It's going to be like no other conference anywhere else in the world. So definitely come on out to that. Also, we keep the Blog Talk radio program moving right along. We will accept your donations. You can just send it to the PayPal, which is Kilindi@hotmail.com. We'll take all of your donations so that we can keep the program running and you can get this information. So we're going to go back to Rob to kind of finish it out this evening. We got about 15 minutes left. So Rob, can you just kind of wrap it up?
Well, yeah, Kilindi. Basically, this is kind of maybe just the first salvo kind of in just getting this information out and getting the continuity of it and whatnot. And I encourage people to do the research. I threw out some names. I threw out some books. I hope they wrote stuff down. And they can look a lot of this stuff up for themselves. if they haven't already done so. Again, a lot of our listening audience is pretty sharp people, and a lot of this may be things that they are familiar with or have heard other places or have already encountered. For those who haven't encountered it, that's why I went into the detail that I went into to try to tie things in. Again, there's a lot still to touch on, and that's going to take going into that whole period between World War I and World War II and the end of World War I, going to the politics and the economics of it and what was happening behind the scenes, and name some key players that later become very influential in American politics, American foreign policy, things that have placed us where we are now, and why, and how does this impact us as citizens, how does this impact us as the black community, because all of it does. All the chickens will come home to roost, as Malcolm X said. So everything from the Kennedy assassination, the Vietnam War, all of these things happened and led to what we are dealing with now. A lot of this can be traced back to what happened between the years of 1945 and 1955, and understand how that groundwork was laid, because even the things that we've experienced recently, like everybody's been watching the news, knows about the shootings in Florida and the rash of these called lone insane gunmen that go into a school or a shopping mall or a movie theater or a public place, and they just, murder whole groups of innocent people. And you have the people screaming for stricter gun laws. You have to understand that all of this is connected. That you need to do the research. You need to go, let's go back to the 1800s, 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, where there was just as many guns out there. I mean, if you go back to the whole Prohibition era, I mean, you had gangs of bootleggers and gangsters who were having wars with each other, and they had Thompson machine guns and all these things. If you look at guys like John Dillinger and all these people, Machine Gun Kelly, all these people, they had these weapons. But the incidences of someone who wasn't actually trying to rob a bank or, have a shootout with police because they're bootlegging liquor, or have a shootout with a rival gang, the incidence was just a private citizen who suddenly walks into a public place for no reason and just murders a bunch of people, and it's not connected to making money, it's not connected to crime, it's not connected to anything. It's just an insane, psychopathic person who becomes a mass murderer. These incidences of this, if you go back in American history and look at these different periods, and you go, well, how much of that was happening back then? You will find almost none. Very little to none. Nowhere near what it is now. But as you go forward in time and you start looking at the period post-1979, so we start going into the 80s and the 90s, you start seeing the incidences of these types of crazy things escalate. What is it that caused that? What is the precursor for that? What came over here between 1945 and 1955 that laid the groundwork to literally create these types of people? These people are not accidents. They are not random. They are happening for a cold, calculated reason. And the next time we get together, I would like to go into what that reason is, program behind it, what is the purpose for it, and where did it come from? That's what because people need to know what you're experiencing today in many areas has been engineered. None of this stuff is random, and none of this stuff is accidental.
Most definitely. Well, we want to get into that period between 1945 and 1963, when the Kennedy assassination happened, in that whole period. And
absolutely. But I'm talking about that was actually the conclusion or the natural fallout of the thing that I'm talking about. So it's all of it tied in. Absolutely.
Yes, dealing with the Korean War, and dealing with the whole Manchurian Candidate, energy, that whole thing, mind control, MK Ultra, and you can't separate these things from the space program, dealing with mind control. You can't separate it from the alien information, dealing with Roswell and things like that, because there's no coincidence that, the man who was dealing with the X-Files and dealing with the information from the Roswell crash in 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, is Guy Bannister, ex-FBI agent, pseudo-detective, friend and colleague of Lee Harvey Oswald, in dealing with New Orleans, and Dave Ferry, and all of those people who were part of the Kennedy assassination.
Clay Shaw,
Clay Shaw, they're all the same. They're all the same people that were hooked up with the Nazis, bringing the Nazis back into the United States.
Operation Paperclip. They were the guys.
Operation
all of them, they were all connected with that.
Operation Artichoke, MK Ultra. Gordon Watson, who was the guy who went to Oaxaca and brought back the mushrooms and wrote the article that sent people like Timothy Leary and others over into Mexico to bring back the sacred mushroom, and Albert Hoffman, LSD, and the CIA, and all of these things. We're going to bring all these things together because this is all part of the congruence of information and knowledge that all went into the 1960s, where Rob talked earlier about, dealing with the mindset of the people, at that particular time, dealing with, things like the environmental movement, the gay movement, the anti-war movement, all of these things happening right around the same place, congregating around that San Francisco, Oakland area.
And you had people in everything from high up in politics and industry to the movie industry, the entertainment industry. All of them were tied in with it. If you think that things that are going on now are not interconnected, that whole interconnectedness is kind of, you can trace it back to that period with Walt Disney.
Yes. We're gonna bring it all together. The Satanic Church of America with Anton LaVey and the sacrifices that went on there with folks like Jane Mansfield and James Dean and the set of Giant and things like that. Them,
Sharon Tate. All of that.
And all of that.
All of that is tied in.
Bruce Lee, the Green Hornet, Batman, all of that, all these things are interconnected. People don't know about Bruce Lee was supposed to be at the where the Manson family was, and we'll get into that,
Well, he was supposed to actually be at that party that night, and he, for some reason, didn't show up. And so was Sammy Davis Jr. was also supposed to be a guest of Sharon Tate at that party that night that the Manson family came in and started everybody. So basically, both of them got the 411 to not be there. And there's a reason, because they're tied in with something. And that whole Hollywood crew was tied in with something. So basically, we can get into it and we can talk about it, and then we can talk about the occult aspects, because, again, this thing is not just science, it's not just politics, it's not just industry, it's heavily immersed in the occult also.
Yes, and the whole deviant homosexual area of the whole thing with those people who were tied up in that Kennedy assassination thing. It goes into Rock Hudson and James Dean basically initiating little Sal Mineo on the set of Giant into this whole thing, and Sal Mineo ultimately becoming the voice of Ronald Reagan, and he gets into things that Dick Gregory basically shared with me personally, So it's a whole conglomeration of things that bring all this stuff together. Roman Polanski.
Yeah, well, all that is part of the whole mind control. All that's part of the whole mind control, and also part of the ritual.
Rosemary's Baby. Roman Polanski was the father of Sharon Tate's baby, and if you know that John Lennon was staying in Roman Polanski's apartment in the village, and he's the one who wrote Helter Skelter, and Helter Skelter was put out on Sharon. It was basically
triggered Manson.
Yeah,
right, yeah. So it's all tied in.
That kind of stuff. So it's all tied in. It's all a web woven with Hollywood, with MK Ultra, with the Nazis, with the Super Soldier program. We're going to get into the Super Sprint because Rob is an expert on the whole thing about how they brought anabolic steroids into the United States and how that is a key factor in a lot of these things. Because
and they're evolving. Yeah, the whole infiltration of sports, athletics, with performance-enhancing drugs, the infiltration of bodybuilding and weightlifting, and which then also became the fitness industry, and how the fitness industry has been corrupted with performance-enhancing drugs to the point where even the people now that follow the whole YouTube fitness industry thing, and it's a big, big thing on YouTube now, and they have thousands of followers, some of these people that have set up these YouTube fitness channels, just about all of them, without exception, are on some type of performance-enhancing drugs and have been so. This has been a state where our youth, the kids that were born in the 80s and 90s, they grew up in the 80s and 90s and have come to their adulthood now, and that are interested in physical fitness, martial arts, bodybuilding, athletics, they have grown into a world where all of the people that they look up to as athletes and bodybuilders and physical culturists and all these things, almost none of them are natural. None of them are athletes that just did it through hard work and good genetics and good nutrition. All of them are examples of being on performance-enhancing drugs, and this drug culture is part of a drug culture that's being pushed on our youth because this is a way of co-opting them into this artificial matrix and basically saying, well, on your own, with your God-given talents and this through hard work, you can't achieve anything that's meaningful, because the standard that you have to compare yourself to is an artificially enhanced, supernatural or superhumanly augmented standard, and it's just the icing on the cake. The steroids and the other performance-enhancing technology, the growth hormone and all of these things, this is just the beginning. They have technologies coming through myostatin inhibitors, recombinant DNA myostatin inhibitors, through gene therapy, through selective androgen receptor modifiers, which is the biggest thing out now, that may actually wind up replacing steroids, or if not doesn't replace them, it will definitely augment them. So you're seeing people who you know they've got muscles and they're in shape, and a lot of these young people are going, let me follow this guy's routine, let me follow his training philosophy, let me follow his nutrition advice, and that person is actually artificially augmented. He has a body that you will never be able to achieve.
All right, Rob.
Working out.
That's it. We're going offline. We'll see everybody next week or the week after. Thank you very much. Peace.
All right then. All right.